The tears fell silently from beneath the white lace veil, dripping onto the dusty floorboards of the small church in Placerville, California, and Finn Iverson knew in that moment something was terribly wrong with the woman standing at the altar. He had only come into town for supplies, stepping into the back of the church to escape the scorching August heat of 1872, not expecting to witness a wedding, and certainly not expecting to see a bride weeping as though her heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces. The preacher stood before her with his Bible open, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles who seemed oblivious to the tears streaming down the young woman's face. The groom, a portly merchant in his 50s with graying hair and a waistcoat stretched tight across his belly, shifted impatiently from foot to foot. The small gathering of townspeople watched with expressions ranging from discomfort to anticipation, but no one spoke up. No one seemed to care that the bride was clearly in distress. Finn's jaw tightened as he observed the scene. He was a man of the mountains, more comfortable among the pines and granite peaks of the Sierra Nevada than in civilized society, but he recognized suffering when he saw it. His broad shoulders filled the doorway as he stood there, his long dark hair tied back with a leather cord, his muscular frame still dusty from the trail. He had planned to slip in, cool off for a moment, and leave unnoticed, but something about this woman's quiet desperation struck him like a physical blow. The preacher began to speak, his voice droning through the traditional ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The woman's shoulders shook with a suppressed sob. Through her veil, Finn could see her hands trembling as she clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers. She could not have been more than 22 or 23. He estimated far too young to look so utterly defeated. "If anyone has reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace." The preacher intoned, the words clearly perfunctory. Not expecting any response, Finn found himself stepping forward before his mind had fully processed the decision. His boots echoed loudly on the wooden floor, and every head in the church turned to stare at him. The mountain man cut an imposing figure as he strode down the center aisle, his muscled arms visible beneath his rolled-up shirt sleeves, his weathered face set with determination. "Wait," he said, his deep voice carrying through the small space. The preacher's mouth fell open in shock. The groom's face flushed an angry red. "Who the devil are you?" the merchant sputtered. Finn ignored him entirely, his gaze fixed on the veiled woman. He stopped a few feet from the altar, close enough to see her clearly now. Even through the lace he could see her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale as death itself. "Madam," Finn said quietly, his voice gentle despite his intimidating appearance. "Why are you crying?" The church erupted in whispers and gasps. The groom stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. You have no right to interrupt these proceedings. Sheriff, remove this man at once." But Finn did not budge. He kept his eyes on the woman, waiting for her answer. For a long moment she said nothing. Her fingers white-knuckled around the bouquet. Then slowly she lifted the veil from her face. She was beautiful, Finn realized, even with tears staining her cheeks. Her dark blonde hair was arranged in careful curls, and her eyes were a striking shade of hazel that seemed to hold both fear and a desperate kind of hope. Her name was Rose Thornton, though Finn did not know it yet, and she was indeed only 22 years old, standing on the precipice of a marriage that would destroy her. "I cannot," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then, louder, with more conviction, "I cannot marry this man." The church descended into chaos. The groom began shouting, the guests murmured in shock, and the preacher looked utterly bewildered. But Finn heard only her words, saw only the courage it took for her to speak them. "Rose Thornton, you will honor this agreement," the groom bellowed, reaching for her arm. "Your father promised you to me to settle his debts. You have no choice in this matter." Finn's hand shot out, gripping the merchant's wrist before he could touch her. The mountain man's strength was evident in the ease with which he held the older man at bay. "The lady said no," Finn said, his tone brooking no argument. "That is the end of it." "This is none of your concern, you wilderness savage," the merchant spat. "Rose, your father owes me $3,000. This marriage is the only way to satisfy that debt. If you refuse, he will be ruined, possibly imprisoned. Is that what you want?" Rose's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "My father should not have gambled away money he did not have," she said, her voice breaking. "But I cannot sacrifice my entire life for his mistakes. I cannot marry a man I do not love. A man who has already told me he expects me to be nothing more than an obedient servant in his household. I would rather die than live such a life." Her honesty hung in the air like a bell's toll. Finn felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of her bravery, her refusal to surrender even in the face of impossible circumstances. He released the merchant's wrist and turned fully to Rose. How much is the debt? Finn asked. Rose blinked at him in confusion. $3,000, but why would you? I have it, Finn said simply. I have been trapping and trading in the mountains for 8 years. I have saved most of what I have earned. I will pay your father's debt. The church fell silent. Even the merchant seemed struck dumb by this declaration. Rose stared at Finn as though he had spoken in a foreign tongue. Why would you do such a thing? She asked, her voice trembling. You do not even know me. Finn met her eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt something other than the simple satisfaction of survival and solitude. He felt purpose. Because no one should be forced into a life they do not want, he said, and because you deserve better than to weep at your own wedding. The merchant found his voice again, sputtering with indignation. You cannot simply buy her like livestock. The agreement was for marriage, not merely payment. The agreement was to settle a debt, Finn countered, his voice hardening. If the debt is paid, there is no need for the marriage. Unless you wish to admit that your interest was not in the money but in acquiring a young wife against her will. The merchant's face purpled, but he could not deny the logic without revealing his own unsavory motives. The townspeople were watching now with new interest, some of them beginning to look at the situation through a different lens. Rose's father, who had been sitting in the front pew looking miserable throughout the entire ceremony, stood up. Thomas Thornton was a thin man in his late 40s, his face drawn with shame and worry. Sir, he said to Finn, his voice hoarse, I cannot allow you to pay such a sum for my daughter's freedom. It would merely transfer the burden from one stranger to another. I ask nothing in return, Finn said firmly. Your daughter will be free of this arrangement with no obligation to me whatsoever. Thomas looked as though he might weep himself. That is the most generous offer I have ever heard, but I cannot accept such charity. I have my pride even if I have lost everything else. Then consider it a loan, Finn said, improvising, to be repaid when you are able, with no interest and no time limit. Will that suit your pride? Rose looked between Finn and her father, hope blooming on her tear-stained face. Father, please, she said softly. I cannot marry him, I truly cannot. Thomas Thornton's shoulders sagged in defeat, but there was relief in his eyes. Very well, he said quietly. I accept your loan, mister. I am sorry, I do not know your name. Finn Iverson, the mountain man said. Mr. Iverson, Thomas continued, I accept your loan and I will repay every cent, though it may take me the rest of my life. The merchant erupted in fresh protests, but the sheriff, who had been watching the proceedings with interest, finally intervened. Vernon, the debt will be paid. You have no legal right to force the girl to marry you if she refuses and the debt is satisfied. I suggest you accept the situation with what grace you can muster. Vernon, the merchant, looked around at the townspeople, seeing disapproval where before there had been indifference. His reputation for preying on those in financial difficulty was well known, but this public display had cast him in an even worse light. With a final glare at Finn and Rose, he turned and stormed out of the church, his footsteps echoing his fury. The guests began to disperse, some offering sympathetic words to Rose and her father, others simply eager to spread the gossip of what had just transpired. Within minutes, only Finn, Rose, Thomas, and the bewildered preacher remained. Rose turned to Finn, and he saw gratitude mixed with confusion in her hazel eyes. Mr. Iverson, she began, her voice still unsteady. I do not know how to thank you. You have saved me from a terrible fate, and I am in your debt, though you say you ask for nothing. No debt, Finn said, feeling suddenly awkward under her direct gaze. He was accustomed to the company of animals and the occasional trader, not young women with eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. I only did what anyone should have done. But no one else did, Rose said softly. No one else in this entire town was willing to stand up and question whether this was right. You are a stranger here, and yet you were the only one with the courage to act. Thomas Thornton extended his hand to Finn, and the mountain man shook it firmly. Mr. Iverson, you have my eternal gratitude. Please allow us to offer you supper at our home this evening. It is the least we can do. Finn hesitated. He was eager to return to his camp in the mountains, away from the complexities of town life. But Rose was looking at him with such hope, such warmth, that he found himself nodding. I would be honored, he said. That evening, as the sun began to set over Placerville, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Finn found himself sitting at the modest table in the Thornton home. The house was small but clean, furnished simply but with care. Rose had changed from her wedding dress into a simple blue cotton dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and she moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, preparing a meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. As they ate, Thomas told Finn the story of how he had come to be in such dire straits. He had been a successful shopkeeper until a series of bad investments and unfortunate circumstances had depleted his savings. In desperation, he had turned to gambling, hoping to recover his losses, but had only made things worse. Vernon, the merchant, had offered to forgive the debt in exchange for Rose's hand in marriage, and Thomas, seeing no other option, had reluctantly agreed. "I am not a good man," Thomas said heavily, staring down at his plate. "I allowed my pride and my foolishness to put my daughter in an impossible position. I will regret that for the rest of my life." "You are human," Finn said simply. "Humans make mistakes. What matters is what you do next." Rose reached over and squeezed her father's hand. "Father, I forgive you," she said gently. "I know you were desperate, and thanks to Mr. Iverson, we have a chance to start over." After dinner, Rose and Finn found themselves alone on the small porch while Thomas cleaned up inside. The night air was cool and pleasant after the heat of the day, and crickets sang in the darkness. Finn leaned against the porch railing, very aware of Rose standing beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Iverson," Rose said softly. "You appeared like an answer to a prayer, but I know nothing about you." "Not much to tell," Finn said, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. "I have been living in the mountains for the past 8 years, trapping and trading. I prefer the wilderness to towns." "Why?" Rose asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Finn was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal. There was something about this woman that made him want to be honest. "I came west after the war," he said finally. "I fought for the Union, saw things no man should see. When it was over, I could not go back to the life I had known before. The mountains gave me peace, a chance to be alone with my thoughts and heal." Rose nodded slowly. "I can understand that," she said. "Sometimes the world can be overwhelming, but do you not get lonely up there by yourself?" "Sometimes," Finn admitted, "but loneliness seemed preferable to being around people who did not understand what I had been through." "And now?" Rose asked softly. Finn turned to look at her, and in the lamplight spilling from the house, she looked ethereal, almost dreamlike. "Now I am beginning to think that perhaps I have been alone long enough," he said, surprising himself with his honesty. Rose smiled, a real smile this time, not the frightened expression she had worn at the church. "I am glad you came to town today, Mr. Iverson. More glad than I can possibly express." "Finn," he said. "Please call me Finn," she repeated, and the way she said his name sent a warmth through his chest that had nothing to do with the summer evening. "And you must call me Rose." They talked long into the night, sitting on that porch under the stars. Rose told him about her life in Placerville, how she had lost her mother to fever 3 years ago and had been keeping house for her father ever since. She spoke of her dreams, small as they seemed to her, of having a garden and maybe writing down the stories she had always carried in her head. Finn found himself telling her about the mountains, describing the beauty of dawn breaking over granite peaks, the crystal clarity of mountain lakes, the profound silence of a forest blanketed in snow. When Finn finally returned to his camp that night, riding out of town on his sturdy horse, his mind was full of hazel eyes and a smile that had chased away his usual solitude. He told himself it was foolish to feel anything for a woman he had just met, a woman whose life was so different from his own. But the heart rarely listens to logic, and Finn Iverson was beginning to realize that his carefully constructed isolation was crumbling. Over the next few days, Finn found himself returning to town far more often than his need for supplies warranted. He told himself he was simply ensuring that Vernon had truly accepted the situation, that Rose and her father were safe, but the truth was he wanted to see her. Each time he rode into Placerville, his first stop was the Thornton home, where Rose would greet him with that radiant smile that made his heart beat faster. Rose, for her part, found herself watching for Finn's arrival, with an anticipation she had never felt before. This quiet, powerful man who had appeared from nowhere to save her from a terrible fate had become the bright spot in her days. She learned that beneath his gruff exterior was a man of deep intelligence and unexpected gentleness. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight and wisdom. One afternoon, nearly a week after the interrupted wedding, Finn took Rose riding outside of town. Thomas had agreed to the outing after Finn assured him his intentions were honorable, though the knowing look in the older man's eyes suggested he saw more than Finn was willing to admit even to himself. They rode to a meadow just beyond the edge of town, a place where wildflowers grew in riotous profusion and a small creek burbled over smooth stones. Finn helped Rose down from her horse, his strong hands spanning her waist with ease, and for a moment they stood close together, neither quite willing to step away. "This is beautiful," Rose said, breaking the spell and walking toward the creek. She knelt beside the water, trailing her fingers through the cool current. "How did you know about this place?" "I explored the area when I first arrived," Finn said, joining her by the creek. He sat down on the grassy bank, his long legs stretched out before him. I make it a habit to learn the land wherever I go. Rose sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Do you ever miss having a permanent home? She asked. A place that is truly yours. Finn considered the question. I have my cabin in the mountains, he said. It is small, just one room really, but I built it with my own hands. In the winter, when the snows come, I stay there and live off what I have stored. In the warmer months, I move around, following the game and the seasons. It sounds lonely, Rose said quietly. It was the life I chose, Finn replied. Then, after a pause, until recently I did not realize how lonely it had become. Rose turned to look at him, and Finn found himself drowning in the depths of her eyes. What changed? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. I met a woman who was brave enough to refuse a marriage that would have made her miserable, Finn said softly. A woman who made me remember that there are things worth coming down from the mountains for. Rose's breath caught, and for a moment the world seemed to hold still. Then slowly Finn reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Rose, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I know we have known each other only a short time. I know I have no right to speak of this, but I cannot deny what I feel. What do you feel? Rose whispered. That you have awakened something in me I thought was dead, Finn said. That when I am with you, the loneliness that has haunted me for 8 years disappears. That the thought of leaving and never seeing you again is unbearable. Tears gathered in Rose's eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy. I feel the same, she confessed. From the moment you stopped my wedding and asked me why I was crying, I felt as though you truly saw me. Not as a burden, not as a means to an end, just as me. And every moment since I have found myself falling for you. Finn cupped her face in his large hand, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. I am not an easy man to be with, he warned. I am rough around the edges, more comfortable in the wilderness than in society. I have little to offer you beyond what I can earn with my hands and my skills. You offered me my freedom when no one else would, Rose said, covering his hand with her own. You offered me kindness and understanding. You have shown me what it means to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide. That is worth more than all the money in the world. Unable to resist any longer, Finn leaned in and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss at first, tentative and sweet, but it deepened as Rose responded, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. For both of them, it was a moment of profound connection, a recognition that they had found in each other something rare and precious. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads resting together. I love you, Rose Thornton, Finn said, the words coming from somewhere deep in his soul. I know it is too soon to say such things, but it is the truth. I love you too, Finn Iverson, Rose replied, her voice filled with wonder. And I do not care if it is too soon. I know my own heart, and it belongs to you. They spent the rest of the afternoon in that meadow, talking and dreaming about what their future might hold. Finn spoke of his cabin in the mountains, wondering aloud if it might be possible to expand it, to make it a true home. Rose talked about her desire for a simple life, one filled with love and purpose rather than luxury and social standing. As the sun began to set, they rode back to town hand in hand, their hearts full of hope. But their happiness was soon to be tested, in ways neither could have anticipated. Vernon, the spurned merchant, had not accepted his defeat as graciously as it had first appeared. Humiliated by the public spectacle at the church and furious at losing what he saw as his rightful property, he had spent the past week nursing his grievances and plotting revenge. He had learned through his network of informants that Finn Iverson was a mountain man with no real ties to Placerville, and he had decided that the best way to punish everyone involved was to ensure Finn could never be with Rose. 2 days after Finn and Rose's afternoon in the meadow, Vernon went to the sheriff with a fabricated story. He claimed that Finn had threatened him, that the mountain man was dangerous and unstable, and that he feared for his life. The sheriff, who had seemed sympathetic during the wedding interruption, was a friend of Vernon's and owed him money. Despite the flimsy evidence, he agreed to arrest Finn on charges of threatening behavior and disturbing the peace. Finn was taken into custody just as he was preparing to leave town after delivering a load of furs to the trading post. He did not resist, knowing that to do so would only make things worse, but his eyes blazed with anger at the injustice of it all. Rose learned of the arrest from a neighbor and immediately rushed to the small jailhouse. She found Finn sitting on a narrow cot in one of the 2 cells, his expression grim but controlled. This is Vernon's doing, Rose said, gripping the bars that separated them. He is lying. You never threatened him. I know, Finn said calmly, but Vernon has influence in this town, and I am just a stranger. The sheriff will believe what he wants to believe. We will fight this, Rose said fiercely. I will tell everyone the truth. I will make them listen. Finn stood and came to the bars, reaching through to take her hands. Rose, you need to be careful. Vernon is a vindictive man. If he is willing to have me arrested on false charges, there is no telling what else he might do. I do not care, Rose said, her eyes flashing with determination. I will not let him destroy our chance at happiness. I will not stand by and do nothing while you suffer for helping me. Over the next several days, Rose became a force to be reckoned with in Placerville. She went door to door, speaking to everyone who had witnessed the wedding interruption, gathering testimonies about Vernon's character and his treatment of others. She discovered that Vernon had a history of exploiting those in financial difficulty, trapping them in unfair agreements and profiting from their desperation. Several people came forward with stories of how Vernon had wronged them, though most were too afraid of his influence to speak publicly. Thomas Thornton, inspired by his daughter's courage, began his own investigation. He reached out to business contacts in Sacramento and other nearby towns, looking for any information that might discredit Vernon's claims. What he discovered was shocking. Vernon was wanted in 2 other towns for fraud and had changed his name to avoid prosecution. Armed with this information, Rose and Thomas went to the judge who would be presiding over Finn's hearing. Judge Morrison was known for being fair-minded, and when presented with the evidence of Vernon's criminal history, he agreed to hear the case with an open mind. The hearing took place on a hot afternoon in late August. The small courtroom was packed with townspeople, some supporting Finn and Rose, others loyal to Vernon out of fear or financial entanglement. Finn sat at the defendant's table, his massive frame making the chair look small, his expression calm despite the gravity of the situation. Vernon took the stand first, spinning his tale of intimidation and threat. He claimed that Finn had grabbed him violently at the church, threatened his life, and made it clear that he would harm Vernon if he did not leave Rose alone. His performance was convincing, his voice quavering with apparent fear. But when Rose took the stand, her testimony was even more powerful. She spoke clearly and passionately about what had really happened that day, how Finn had intervened not with violence but with compassion, how he had offered to pay her father's debt with no expectation of anything in return. She described Vernon's predatory behavior, his attempt to force her into a marriage against her will, and his fury at being thwarted. Mr. Iverson saved me from a fate worse than death, Rose said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. He is a good man, an honorable man, and these charges against him are nothing but lies born of Vernon's wounded pride and desire for revenge. Thomas then presented the evidence of Vernon's criminal past, producing documents that showed warrants for his arrest under his real name, Walter Vance. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers, and Vernon's face went pale as he realized his carefully constructed reputation was crumbling before his eyes. Judge Morrison called for order, and after reviewing the evidence he made his decision. The charges against Finn Iverson are dismissed, he declared. Furthermore, I am ordering that Walter Vance, also known as Vernon, be taken into custody pending investigation of the outstanding warrants against him. This court will not tolerate fraud and deception. The courtroom erupted again, this time in cheers and applause. Rose felt tears of relief streaming down her face as Finn was released from custody. He came to her immediately, pulling her into his arms in front of everyone, not caring who saw or what they thought. It is over, he murmured into her hair. You did this. Your courage saved me. We saved each other, Rose replied, clinging to him. That is what love does. In the weeks that followed, Placerville settled back into its normal rhythms, but everything had changed for Finn and Rose. Vernon, or rather Walter Vance, was transported to Sacramento to face trial for his various crimes, his influence in the town completely destroyed. Those he had wronged began to speak openly, sharing their stories and supporting one another in seeking justice. Thomas Thornton, freed from the burden of his debt and inspired by his daughter's example, began rebuilding his business with a new sense of purpose. He refused to allow Finn to simply forgive the loan, insisting on working to repay it honestly, and Finn respected that pride enough to accept the arrangement. As summer faded into autumn, Finn and Rose spent every possible moment together. Finn taught Rose to ride with confidence, to read the signs of the wilderness, to appreciate the raw beauty of the land beyond the town's borders. Rose, in turn, taught Finn that vulnerability was not weakness, that allowing someone into his heart did not diminish his strength but enhanced it. One crisp October morning, Finn took Rose to see his cabin in the mountains. It was a long ride, several hours into the high country where the aspens were turning gold, and the air was sharp with the promise of coming winter. When they finally arrived, Rose saw a small but sturdy structure nestled among towering pines, with a view that took her breath away. "This is where you live?" she asked, dismounting and turning in a slow circle to take in the scenery. "This is where I have lived," Finn corrected gently. "But I have been thinking it is time for a change." Rose looked at him questioningly, and Finn took her hands in his. "Rose, I know your life is in Placerville with your father and the community you know. I would never ask you to leave that behind. But I also know that I cannot go back to the solitary life I had before. I need you more than I need the mountains." "What are you saying?" Rose asked, though hope was blooming in her chest. "I am saying that I want to build a life with you wherever that may be," Finn said. "If you want to stay in town, I will find a way to make that work. I can hire on as a guide, use my skills to earn a living while being near you. Or if you are willing, we could make this place into a real home. I could expand the cabin, make it comfortable and warm. We would be isolated during the winter months, but in spring and summer we could go back and forth to town. It would be a hard life, but it would be ours." Rose looked from Finn to the cabin, then out at the spectacular vista spread before them. She thought about her life in Placerville, the social expectations, the gossip, the constraints of living in a small town where everyone knew your business. Then she thought about this place, wild and free, where she could be herself without judgment, where she could write her stories and tend her garden and live each day with the man she loved. "I choose this," she said firmly. "I choose you and this life and all the adventures it will bring. My father will understand. He wants me to be happy, and you make me happier than I have ever been." Finn's face broke into a smile, genuine and radiant, unlike any expression Rose had seen on him before. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and gratitude into the gesture. "We will need to do this properly," Finn said when they finally came up for air. "I want to marry you. Rose Thornton. I want you to be my wife in the eyes of God and the law." "Yes," Rose said simply. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in November in the same small church where Finn had stopped Rose's first wedding, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Rose wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Finn had cleaned up for the occasion, his long hair trimmed slightly but still falling past his shoulders, his powerful frame dressed in new clothes that Rose had helped him select. Thomas Thornton walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes. But they were tears of joy this time. The church was filled with friends and well-wishers, people who had come to respect and admire both Finn and Rose for their courage and integrity. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, there was only warm laughter, a shared memory of how this couple had come together. And when Finn and Rose exchanged their vows, there were no tears of sadness, only the radiance of two people who had found in each other a perfect partner. The reception was held at the hotel, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Finn, who had spent years avoiding social gatherings, found himself enjoying the celebration because Rose was by his side, her hand in his, her joy infectious. They danced together despite Finn's protests that he did not know how, and Rose taught him the steps right there on the floor, laughing at his earnest concentration. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Finn and Rose slipped away from the party. They rode out of town together, heading toward the mountains and the cabin that would be their home. The night was clear and cold, perfect for traveling, and they made good time on the well-worn trail. They arrived at the cabin near dawn, just as the first light was touching the peaks. Finn had spent the previous weeks expanding and improving the structure, adding a second room and installing a proper stove. He had also built furniture, using skills he had learned from a carpenter he had worked with years ago. It was still simple compared to a townhouse, but it was comfortable and well-made, built with love for the woman who would share it with him. Rose walked through the cabin, touching everything with wonder. She saw the bed Finn had crafted with his own hands, the table and chairs he had made, the shelves he had installed for her books and treasures. In the main room there was a large window facing east, perfectly positioned to catch the sunrise. "It is perfect," she whispered, turning to find Finn watching her anxiously. "Finn, it is absolutely perfect." He came to her then, gathering her into his arms. "This is our beginning," he said softly. "Our real beginning, with no shadows of the past, no one to tell us how to live. Just you and me and the life we will build together." That first winter in the mountains was a time of discovery for both of them. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies of sharing a life. Rose discovered that Finn was an early riser who liked to watch the dawn with a cup of coffee in hand. Finn learned that Rose hummed while she worked and that she had a gift for making even the simplest meal delicious. The cabin was often snowed in for days at a time, but neither of them minded. They had laid in plenty of supplies, and the isolation gave them time to simply be together without the distractions of the outside world. Finn taught Rose to track animals in the snow, to recognize the signs of weather changes, to survive in the wilderness. Rose read to Finn from the books she had brought, shared the stories she had been writing, helped him rediscover the joy of literature and learning that he had set aside during his years of solitude. They also learned each other's bodies and hearts with a tenderness and passion that surprised them both. Finn, who had lived for so long without human touch, found in Rose a wellspring of affection and desire. Rose, who had feared that intimacy would be a duty rather than a pleasure, discovered with Finn a profound physical and emotional connection that left her breathless and grateful. When spring came, melting the snow and opening the trails, they made their first trip back to Placerville as a married couple. Thomas was overjoyed to see them, and the town welcomed them warmly. Rose was glad to see her father, to reassure him that she was happy and thriving, but she was even more glad when they returned to the mountains a week later. Over the years that followed, Finn and Rose built a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. They were not wealthy by conventional standards, but they had enough. Finn continued to trap and trade, developing a reputation for fair dealing and quality furs. Rose started a small garden near the cabin, growing vegetables and herbs that they used throughout the year. She also began writing in earnest, crafting stories of the West that captured both its beauty and its hardships. In their third year of marriage, Rose gave birth to a daughter. The birth took place in the cabin with the help of a midwife who had come up from town, and Finn was present throughout, holding Rose's hand and offering what comfort he could. When he first held his daughter, a tiny, perfect creature with Rose's eyes and his dark hair, he wept openly, overwhelmed by the depth of love he felt. They named her Emma, and she grew up wild and free in the mountains, learning to ride before she could properly walk, absorbing her parents' love of the natural world. Finn was a devoted father, patient and gentle with his daughter while still teaching her the skills she would need to thrive in their environment. Rose watched her husband with their child, and felt her love for him grow deeper with each passing day. 2 years after Emma's birth, they had a son, whom they named James. He was as different from his sister as night from day, quieter and more contemplative, but just as beloved. Finn and Rose's cabin rang with the sounds of children's laughter, and what had once been a place of solitude became a place of family and joy. As the children grew, Finn and Rose made more frequent trips to Placerville so that Emma and James could know their grandfather and be part of the larger community. Thomas, who had successfully rebuilt his business and regained his standing in the town, doted on his grandchildren. He had never remarried, content with his work and his family, and he took great pride in the life Rose had created for herself. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of life in the mountains. Finn and Rose faced challenges, certainly harsh winters, scarce game, the occasional injury or illness, but they faced them together, their love a constant source of strength. They also experienced profound joys, watching their children grow and learn, celebrating small victories, finding beauty in everyday moments. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Finn took Rose back to the meadow where they had first confessed their love. The children were staying with Thomas for a few days, giving their parents a rare opportunity to be alone together. They rode out in the early morning, the November air crisp but not yet cold enough for snow. The meadow was different in autumn than it had been in summer. The wildflowers long gone, the grass turned golden and dry. But to Finn and Rose it was just as beautiful, laden with memories of who they had been and all they had become. They spread a blanket on the ground and sat together, Rose leaning back against Finn's broad chest, his arms wrapped around her. For a long while they simply sat in comfortable silence, listening to the creek and the wind in the trees. "Do you ever regret it?" Finn asked suddenly. "Choosing this life instead of staying in town, having an easier existence?" Rose turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "Finn, you gave me the greatest gift anyone ever could, the freedom to choose my own path. And every day since you have shown me what it means to be truly loved and valued. How could I possibly regret that?" "I just want you to be happy," Finn said, his voice rough with emotion. "You and the children are everything to me. If I thought you were unhappy, it would destroy me." "I am happy," Rose assured him, cupping his bearded face in her hands. "I am happier than I ever imagined possible. You taught me what love should be, not a cage or a duty, but a partnership built on respect and genuine affection. You gave me a life of purpose and adventure, and you gave me our beautiful children. How could I ask for more?" Finn kissed her then, a kiss that held 10 years of love and devotion. "I am the one who should be grateful," he murmured against her lips. "You brought me back to life, Rose. You made me remember that I was more than just a survivor, that I could be a husband and a father, and a man with a future to look forward to. They made love there in the meadow, under the vast blue sky, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long familiarity and the passion of deep love. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the blanket, talking and laughing and planning for the years ahead. As the sun began to set, they packed up and rode back toward the cabin. But as they crested a rise that gave them a view of their home, they saw smoke rising from the chimney. Alarmed, Finn urged his horse forward, Rose close behind him. They had left the cabin empty that morning, carefully banking the fire to prevent just such a situation. But as they drew closer, they realized the smoke was intentional. Someone was at the cabin. Finn motioned for Rose to stay back while he approached cautiously, his rifle at the ready. But then he heard a familiar voice call out, "Finn, Rose, it is me, Thomas." They rode into the clearing to find Thomas standing by the cabin, looking exhausted but triumphant. Beside him was a wagon loaded with supplies and, to their shock, several men from town. "Father," Rose exclaimed, dismounting quickly. "What are you doing here? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Thomas assured her, embracing his daughter. "In fact, everything is quite right. I have news that could not wait, and I wanted to share it with you in person." Over dinner that night, surrounded by friends from town who had made the long journey up the mountain, Thomas revealed his news. He had been working for months on a business venture, one that had finally come to fruition. He had partnered with investors in Sacramento to open a series of trading posts throughout the Sierra Nevada, and he wanted Finn to manage the operation. "It would mean good, steady income," Thomas explained. "You would still live up here, still trap and hunt as you do now, but you would also coordinate the other trading posts, ensure fair prices, maintain relationships with the trappers and traders. It would give you financial security and still allow you the freedom of the mountains." Finn looked at Rose, seeing both excitement and concern in her eyes. They had never sought wealth, but the opportunity to provide better for their children, to ensure their education and futures, was tempting. "What do you think?" Finn asked Rose quietly. "I think we should consider it carefully," Rose said. "But I also think my father would not have offered if he did not believe you were the right man for the job." They talked long into the night, weighing the pros and cons, discussing what such a change would mean for their family. Finally, they agreed to accept Thomas's offer, with the condition that they would maintain their home in the mountains and their way of life, using the business as a supplement rather than a replacement for their existing existence. The decision proved to be a wise one. Over the years that followed, Finn developed a reputation as an honest and skilled businessman, someone who understood both the wilderness and the needs of those who made their living from it. The trading posts flourished under his management, and the steady income allowed Emma and James to receive good educations, splitting their time between the mountain cabin and schools in Placerville and Sacramento. Emma grew into a strong, independent young woman who inherited her father's love of the wilderness and her mother's gift for storytelling. She eventually became a journalist, writing articles about life in the West that were published in newspapers across the country. James became a naturalist, studying the flora and fauna of the Sierra Nevada and working to preserve the wilderness his parents had taught him to love. As Finn and Rose grew older, they watched with pride as their children found their own paths, built their own lives. Emma married a newspaperman from Sacramento, a kind man who respected her independence and supported her work. James married a teacher from Placerville, a woman with a gentle spirit and a sharp mind. Both couples gave Finn and Rose grandchildren, and the cabin that had once been a sanctuary for two became a gathering place for a growing family. Through all the changes and challenges, Finn and Rose's love never wavered. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming a steady, unshakable foundation for everything they built. They still made time to be alone together, to ride out to the meadow or sit on the porch watching the stars, remembering the day when a mountain man stopped a wedding and asked a crying bride why she wept. On a summer evening in their 30th year of marriage, Finn and Rose sat on that same porch, now gray-haired and weathered but still strong. Their grandchildren were playing in the clearing, their laughter echoing through the trees. Emma and her husband were visiting along with James and his family, making the cabin burst with life and noise and love. "Do you remember the first time you came to this cabin?" Finn asked Rose, taking her hand. "I remember thinking it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen," Rose said, squeezing his fingers. "And I remember thinking that I would be happy here, as long as I was with you." "Were you right?" Finn asked, though he already knew the answer. "I was right about everything that mattered," Rose said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I was right to trust you, to love you, to build this life with you. You were worth every risk, every challenge, every moment of doubt. Finn kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. You saved me, Rose. That day in the church, I thought I was saving you, but the truth is you saved me. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope again, to love again. We saved each other, Rose corrected gently. That is what love does. It saves us from our loneliness, from our fears, from the parts of ourselves that have forgotten how to be whole. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Finn and Rose sat together surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built. In that moment, watching their legacy play out before them, they knew that every choice they had made, every hardship they had endured, had been worth it. Years later, when both had passed on to their eternal rest, their children and grandchildren would tell the story of how they met. They would speak of a bride in tears and a mountain man with the courage to ask why, of a love that defied convention and expectation, of a partnership built on freedom and respect and genuine affection. And they would remember that sometimes the most profound love stories begin not with grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but with one person having the courage to see another's pain and the compassion to do something about it. The cabin still stands in the mountains, maintained by Emma and James and their descendants, a testament to the love that built it and the family it sheltered. And in Placerville, the story of Finn Iverson and Rose Thornton is still told, a reminder that true love is not about possession or obligation, but about two souls choosing each other freely and building something beautiful together. In the end, the tears that soaked Rose's veil before those first vows began led her to a life beyond anything she could have imagined. And Finn, the mountain man who stopped everything to ask her why, found in her answer the key to his own salvation. Together they proved that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that begin with a question, answered with courage and leading to a lifetime of joy.